Hi folks, this is part one in our series on the bioenergetic mechanics and spirituality, and the topic is wholeness and holism. This course is about one of the greatest mysteries of the universe. Wholeness and holism is about the interconnectedness of all things. In our current Earth paradigm, we dismiss this interconnectedness and follow a path of separation of consciousness, either not wanting to go this route because of lack of evidence, or following the doctrine of separation that we've been indoctrinated with. This course will cover the theory of wholeness and holism and the interconnectedness of all things, as well as the evidence that shows that all things are indeed interconnected. In this first part, we will cover the theory of wholeness and holism in order to more fully understand this. In order to more fully understand this, we would have to refer back to previous information covered in previous courses. I urge that the previous courses be fully understood before progressing further. In particular, students should fully understand the mechanics of creation, soul evolution, the multidimensional universe, mastering the hologram, and attitudes of mastery, as these form the basis for more fully understanding wholeness and holism. Here's a little history of how the notion of holism came about.
Welcome to Discover Holism. My name is Judy Ann McNamara. I'm the founder of Mish, and I have created this slideshow for you to help you integrate the meaning of holism and the introduction that you read in the handout. So we mentioned in the handout that the most important person to know when you're talking about holism is Jan Christian Smuts. He was the fellow who coined the word. He first used it or defined it in a book called Holism and Evolution, written in 1926. I felt that it was important to know the original meaning and how the whole idea of holism came about. We use the word holistic and body-mind and holistic medicine, holistic practice. But what does holism really mean? And that's an important question for all of us to know as we move forward. Now, his book is free to download or to read on the internet. You can also buy it at Amazon and a number of other places. It's highly recommended that you read the book, especially if you're in the Mish program. I suggest that you read the book while you're doing this unit or this course. It'll help you integrate the book and understand the book. It was written in 1926, that's almost a century ago. But yet it's very pertinent to today. It's actually fascinating to see how brilliant Jan Christian Smuts was, how well he had integrated the ideas in Einstein's theory of relativity and Darwin's theory of evolution, and come to really important insights that are true to today. So it's an inspiring book, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. There is a link to the online version of the book, including a downloadable version, in the unit materials. So the important insight, and perhaps the most important insight that is at the basis of holism, is that all of nature is made of wholes. And that evolution is the creation of new wholes. That everything that comes into being comes in as a whole. This is a really central concept. We are surrounded by a world where everything is in itself an entity. Elements, planets, plants, cells, organisms, every thing that we see in our environment is in itself a whole. So anything that comes into being through evolution is a whole. Koestler called these entities holons to emphasize the fact that each one is unique, each one is a separate expression, and yet a whole within itself. This idea of an evolution or movement of wholes was also shared, or continues to be shared, by the most recent and well-known philosophers such as Ken Wilber. So this isn't an idea that died off with Jan Smuts. Ken Wilber, in one of his phenomenal books called A Brief History of Everything, revisits and synthesizes the whole history of humanity and life on the planet and creation. And through that synthesis, through this extraordinary revisiting of everything that we know about life and how it evolved, he came to an explanation of the hollow movement, a whole-based universe. So here again we have the idea of the whole and an evolution of wholes that is well supported by quantum physicists as well, such as David Bohm and David Peat. We'll be taking a look at their theories and ideas a little bit later in this slideshow. So holism, what is holism? Holism is the active creative process of the universe towards ever more and deeper wholeness, starting from the smallest atom all the way up to the most complex living organism. We see a process in evolution that is an obvious growth of complexity, growth of wholeness in more and more complex forms. And behind evolution is a force, is something driving it towards this greater and greater wholeness. And that force is holism. So holism isn't just an idea. It is an activity. It is a force. It is the synthetic, ordering, organizing, regulative activity of the universe. It's an active, creative process, a force that drives the synthesis of wholes, right from the atom through the cell and organisms, through the expression of mind in animals and in man. So now let's look at some of the properties of this force called holism and what Jan actually meant when he used the word. He used an example of water made of oxygen and hydrogen. It's a very simple example, but it's very interesting from the point of view that if we look at each element, such as oxygen and hydrogen, these are elements that are complete wholes within themselves. Everything, as we know, from iron, copper, etc., all of these are pure elements that have unique properties and are made up of a specific kind of atom and a specific kind of form, actually field, that creates those properties. So oxygen is an atom that has the properties of being gaseous and inflammable, highly inflammable, as we know. And hydrogen is also a gas that is also very inflammable and even lighter than oxygen. Now what's interesting is when we have these two wholes coming together, to form water, which is 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, and we're all very familiar with water. Well, what do we know about the properties of water? If we were to try to guess the properties of water just from the properties of hydrogen and oxygen, we would be totally misled. We would imagine, well, since it's made of hydrogen and oxygen, then it too would be a gas at room temperature. It too would be inflammable and very light. But that's not the case, is it? Water is a liquid at room temperature. It's totally non-inflammable. We even use it to put flat fires out. And it has totally different reactions and properties and weight than either hydrogen or oxygen. So we cannot deduce the characteristics of a whole from its parts, even if those parts are complete wholes of their own. So what we see then is in the creation of complete wholes, in this process called evolution, whatever new whole is produced cannot be deduced from the previous ones. It truly is new. It truly has its own essence, its own unique properties. It's a new whole. And what is it that makes this whole unique? Plato used the word soul to describe the essence that makes the whole greater than the mere sum of its parts. So in other words, what makes water different than either hydrogen or oxygen is the essence of water. So the essence of hydrogen is different than the essence of oxygen, which is different than the essence of water. And this essence is of great importance to us as homeopaths, because it is actually what is captured in the homeopathic remedy, is not the material aspect of the new whole, but the essence of that whole. More about that later and in Unit 4. But for now, let's take a look at this idea of the greater whole, and that there is, which means that there is something more than the parts. That's something more that also defines and informs all the parts. Let's take, for example, a plant. Now, what's interesting in a plant is that each one of its cells is more or less similar. They're identical, at least in their early stages, having exactly the same structure, both internally and externally. But at some point they differentiate into the different parts and functions that we are familiar with in the plant. So that same cell, that same undifferentiated cell, can become a root, a stem, a leaf, a flower, or a fruit. Now, how it knows to become either one of those is through the wholeness of the plant. It's the essence of the plant. It's that the holism, that organizing force of the plant, the life force of the plant, which we call holism, that informs each one of the parts so that it can differentiate into what the plant as a whole requires for its survival. So in this example, if we were to have many days of overcast skies, the plant cells would not differentiate into flowers, because when the sky is overcast or rainy, the insects and pollinating animals aren't around. So it doesn't make sense to have a flower to attract anyone if they're not around. Instead, however, it would make much more sense to differentiate into a leaf and to make more leaves so that the plant can capture more of the sunlight and have more food to store, so that when a flower is produced, that there'll be enough energy in the plant for it to be able to nourish its fruit. So it is the plant in relationship to its environment that then informs each one of its cells as to how it needs to differentiate. That is the process of holism at work. And we can see that process more and more clearly as we go up the ladder of evolution and see how holism comes to expression through each one of the new wholes that it produces. We can even say that each one of the cells, here you have a whole bunch of cells with their chloroplasts in a leaf, that each new plant cell finds new meaning within the new context of a bigger whole. So even though each one of those plant cells could theoretically live on its own, it lives in a collaboration, in a very tight collaboration, almost a synthesis with all of the other cells in the plant to create the whole, this new complex whole called a plant. Therefore, we see a movement in evolution of not only to greater wholes, just to be bigger and more complex, but there's a significance in that, there's a meaning in that. And we'll see more in that in Unit 2. What's important is that we understand the definition of holism, which is that all of nature moves towards greater wholeness and significance. And holism is the force through which that happens. So let's take a look at what we've seen so far. We now know that evolution is the process of whole making, and that's the cornerstone of the understanding of holism. Because holism is the whole-making force that drives evolution, that also sustains life, and is really the infrastructure of complex organisms. And that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Any whole that we take in nature has its own essence. And in complex wholes, we see that the whole is in each part, as we saw in the plant, but also every part is in the whole. So in living species, the differentiation into parts becomes almost impossible because of that interconnectedness between the part and the wholes. What we begin to see so clearly in life is how all of life is totally interconnected. So now with this understanding, we're going to look at some of the questions that science struggles with. Science cannot answer questions such as what is life? What is living versus non-living? Or how did life begin? If life and mind can evolve from matter, then perhaps matter isn't what we thought it was, or still think it to be. In other words, if life is an interconnected whole, then matter must be interconnected as well, and not just a bunch of separated stuff. And this is where Einstein's theory of relativity and the whole idea of the space-time continuum, as well as the quantum physics definition of fields, helps us see matter more coherently and accurately. It's actually become essential that we understand matter. Here we are in 2015, almost 2016, and we're discovering that it's becoming more and more essential to understand the inherent structure of matter in order to understand life and evolution. All of life is an interconnected tapestry, a tapestry that's woven in with all living organisms. Nothing exists independently. The universe and us and everything in it are interconnected movements of fields. More and more scientists, and certainly the scientists who delve deeply into the true nature of matter, the true nature of the universe, and the true nature of life, recognize this interconnectedness, recognize this intelligence. So what our conclusions are is that holism is the universal tendency to form wholes. that holism is much more than the body-mind concept. It's a meta-philosophy, a metaphysics and cosmology. Holism is the force behind life and evolution. That holism is consistent with physics and evolution. It's supported with the findings of quantum physics. And great thinkers, especially physicists who have explored the very frontier of matter, discovered where matter meets mystery. That discovery changed their perception of life to one that embraced holistic concepts. Holism is becoming a requirement in science and research, because holism can overcome the limitations of analysis, mechanism, and reductionism. I hope you enjoyed this slideshow. We're just at the beginning of our exploration. We will continue in Unit 2.
Now I'd like to explain the theory of wholeness in holism so you get a better understanding of what we're talking about. In order to understand it, we should understand that there is something called the ethereal realm and the material realm. And I'll explain this more as we go along. In the ethereal realm, you have holism. In the material realm, you have separation. The ethereal realm creates etheric reality. The material realm creates physical reality. Etheric reality has many layers. These are layers of waves with different frequencies. Material reality also has many layers, like particles, morphogenetic fields, atoms, molecules, and cells, that make up the same thing. And in the ethereal realm, we discover who we are. And in the material realm, we discover who we appear to be. In the ethereal realm, we find that the ethereal realm is the cause. And in the material realm, we see the effect. Now the ethereal realm causes waves which create particles, which we explained in the mechanics of creation. And the waves are light, which provides information, and sound, which manifests in our reality, material reality, as emotion. In the ethereal realm, causes the rhythm of life, and its effect in our physical material realm is frequency. And the ethereal realm creates something called chi, or life energy. And in our material realm, this causes the effect of this is animation. In the material realm, we experience a hologram. But in the ethereal realm, we experience a hologram. In the ethereal realm, we find truth and objectivity. But in the material realm, the cause creates the effect of the truth seeker and creates subjectivity. In the ethereal realm, we find who we are, and in the material realm, who we appear to be. In the next part of this course, we will deal with how wholeness and holism works in the universe. So, thank you for watching. Don't forget to watch part 2 of this course